even if I see one in a pocket when I'm going from 1 to 1, like I usually trolling motor and hunt in, and I see a new one, I'm like, okay, mark that, and I just keep going.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank. Hold the line, hey, you know we on the way. All the time, yeah, we do this every day.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, back here on Take It to the Bank podcast, our very first one for the month of April, have got recent classic competitor, Mr. Rob G. Let's give him a round of applause here.
What's going on?
Super glad you coming to join us again. We didn't run you off the first time, so that's always a good thing.
For sure.
Dude, just got back from the Classic over the weekend. Let's talk about fishing Bassmaster Classic. You know, if you could describe it in 3 words, give me 3 words to describe the Bassmaster Classic.
It was crazy and awesome, and the fishing was tough. So I'll say tough.
I could see that. So from start to finish, I feel like most people, you know, all they see is the 3 days that's televised and all that. But from what I've talked to with friends that fish it and being around it with media day and all that good stuff, like it is a crazy week altogether. Like it's absolutely nuts.
It is.
Tell us about the week as a whole and kind of what happened, what you expected going in, and then what it turned out to be after you were there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I didn't really even know what to expect, you know, never fishing one before. I'd been, you know, to the Classic before, but just the 3 days of the competition, and that's what usually people see it as the Classic. But as an angler in the Classic, it's completely different. I mean, it's just a wild week. You get there a week in advance, so your first day of practice starts 1 week before the first day of the tournament. So you get 3 days to practice that weekend, the week before the tournament. And then that coming Monday, so Monday before the Friday of the tournament, that's when your off period kind of starts, and you start doing like the meetings and checking in your hotel an hour away. Like we had to leave the lake. We were staying there in the Airbnb, drive an hour and a half to where we were supposed to stay for the tournament, check in the boatyard and everything on that Monday, and get settled in Fort Worth. So we pretty much practiced for 3 days, then transitioned to go travel to Fort Worth, and we started all the shenanigans of Classic Week.
What surprised you the most about it?
It was just a busy schedule. You know what I mean? You didn't have much time to really think about fishing, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
it was kind of like it was just all kinds of just stuff going on. But being my first one, I would definitely want to get back to the next one because I feel like I'll be better prepared, and like it being my first time doing it, you know, I was just kind of starstruck, if that makes sense. Kind of like, what in the world's going on? Soaking it in, you know what I mean?
So you were able to do that. Like you were able to be, hey, this is like for me, I really feel like coming in, being pulled in that very first day, and like being pulled into the arena and in your boat and having the fish sitting there and fans cheering and all that kind of thing. Was it like, that's always been a dream of mine. Was it completely surreal to be able to do that?
It was the coolest thing. I was the first guy through too, because I was boat 6. And my dad was my boat caddy, so he got to like back my boat in to put me on the trailer, right? So he had my keys there at Ray Roberts, and he was one of the first guys to back the boat in. So we were one of the first guys to leave the lake. So we got back, like, I was the first guy back pretty much to the weigh-in. And as soon as I got there, they hooked the Toyota up to my truck, and they were like, you're going to be the first guy to weigh in on day 1. And I was like, holy crap. My goodness. Why are we putting a guy that's never done this before first? But I guess it's better to be first than last in your first weigh-in. You know what I mean? So I got to lead the Classic. I can say that I led the Classic for a few anglers, but I was definitely in the lead for maybe 2 or 3 guys.
That's awesome. So like that, describe that feeling when you first got pulled in there.
They get you back there in the arena, and it's just a big black curtain, right? It's a huge black curtain, and the truck's just facing into the curtain. You just hear noise like Mercer talking and people cheering out there, and you don't know like really what's you're about to see. Like we got to walk through it with the arena lights on during the week to see like how we were going to get dropped off and where we need to walk on the stage and stuff. but there was nobody in there. You know what I mean?
Right.
And all the lights were on. And like, so you could see kind of past the curtains where it was just like more dark. And they opened up them curtains. It was like you hear people talking on mics like, all right, send him. And they opened up the curtains and it was just bam, a stage with Mercer up there and fans everywhere. And I was like, holy crap. It was the only way I can really describe it. It felt like I was, I don't know, running through the tee or being like a Tennessee basketball player running out in Thompson Bowling, you know, when they're doing the starting lineup. That's kind of how I would feel like it would be pretty comparable to.
Dude, that is awesome.
I feel like a spotlight hits you and it was just all on you. Like it was crazy.
See, I would be like scared to death. I would stumble getting out of my boat and fall and drop fish everywhere and be chasing them around and all that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. I definitely was thinking about that. Like, don't mess this up. Cause I had a big one on day one. So I was going to hold it up before I got to and when I grabbed it out of the bag, I couldn't get the bag out of my freaking live well, so I had to like hold my bag there so my fish didn't jump out and hold the fish up. Like I was like, what do I do here? That was funny.
That is awesome. Well, I'm sure it's going to be the very first of many. Like everybody, you know, Kevin Van Dam fished his first one time too, so it's going to be the first of many. I know it probably wasn't the finish that you wanted. You know, really quickly, let's just talk about the tournament and kind of what you found and what happened during the Derb.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, as y'all probably seen a lot of posts from guys fishing the Classic about how just horrible the wind was in practice. And even the first day of the tournament and second day, the wind got pretty bad. But I mean, in practice, you couldn't really even run. The lake is not very big. It's not a huge lake like you would find like in Tennessee or somewhere where there's a lot of places you can run and making 45 minutes to an hour run. Like, fishing on Ray Roberts, you don't burn a lot of gas running around, if that makes sense. But when you get into areas, it's hard to, it's not big, but when you get into areas, it's hard to get into them and get out. Cause it's like, once the timber starts, it's a dang jungle. And like, there's no even boat lane that people have tracked to hardly even idle in without smoking trees. So you have to go as slow as possible so you don't tear your lower unit up and your prop up on trees. So it's just like a really slow process of getting around on this smaller lake, if that makes sense. And with the wind blowing 50 miles per hour, it made it, I mean, almost impossible getting around and trying to even fish. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that really just threw a big curveball for a lot of us, especially guys that hadn't been there before. You know, like I went and drove around in pre-practice, but got winded out a couple of days there too. Like I didn't really get to explore a lot. So this was like my first time really seeing and then getting all this wind. You couldn't explore the lake. You kind of had to protect the protected areas and just go off that. And everybody else in the whole field was fishing that in practice. So not a lot of bites were had by anyone. So for me and my roommates, I mean, I travel with 3 hammers. I feel like none of us, all 4 of us, I mean, we were getting maybe 2-3 bites the whole day on a great day during our practice. So it was just completely brutal for us. And we never really had anything dialed in. So my day one of the Classic, like I'm honestly like, I'm not too discouraged about how my Classic went with how practice went. Like I literally caught 4 bass all of practice. You know what I mean? So to catch a limit that first day, like I was so happy. Like, you don't even understand how tough it was for people like just that weren't on them that y'all seen on live. You know what I mean? Like those guys had it figured out, but there wasn't but 7, 8 of them, you know, or 10, you know, for like, it would have been a rough lake to have a full field tournament at, you know what I mean?
No doubt.
There would have been a lot of zeros for sure. But like day 2 of the Classic, it was a regular day for me at Ray Roberts. I had 2 bites the entire day and only caught one of them, lost the other. So that's kind of how that went. But that's just kind of how practice was for me too. So every day I've had on Ray Roberts, it has been like that except day 1 of the Classic. So at least I caught a limit on Ray Roberts. It is possible for me. So
right.
Yeah, so I'm taking that as a positive.
You should. And I mean, dude, it was the Catalina wine mixer of fishing. Like it's the Bassmaster Classic. And like I said, you're going to fish a lot more of them and do well in some. So it's always good to get the first one behind you. Well, let's get out of Texas and let's get back home to Tennessee. the great volunteer state. And let's talk about some Highland Reservoir fishing in the month of April. Our beloved Tennessee Vols just lost.
Dodge trees.
This is true. This is true. Our beloved Vols just lost, but that's okay. That's all right. We still got a good football team and a good baseball team rolling too. So
for sure.
Let's dive right in. And correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what you did on Highland Reservoirs in the month of March is it was really bait based. So you were looking in ditches and drains, using your big motor a lot, running, in and out of these pockets and that kind of thing, looking for bait. You would also try to find some, scattered cover off of points and that type deal as well. And that's what you went and looked at kind of as a backup pattern. You said clay was always pretty good. You could crank it or scope it, whatever, but primarily scoping around bait was really the best way to catch them in the month of March. Fast forward a month, let's talk about April some. So how does that change? If we've been catching them, scoping with a minnow, with a jerk bait, maybe cranking some clay, whatever we're doing, how does all that change when we get into the month of April?
So April for me is usually around here in Tennessee is when the big spawn happens. Like, the days are finally longest, and that big wave of spawners usually happens in the month of April. And that it's kind of like the 1 month of the whole year. Like I like to fish offshore, but like the 1 month I do strictly like mainly fish shallow. You know what I mean? Like 80% of the time is in April. That's when there's all the bass move up shallow. The bucks are making beds and the females are real close up there watching the bucks, like, make their beds. And so the females are close, and it's just a fun time. You can use your eyes. You don't have to, you can turn your graphs off and you can use your eyes and fish for fish you're visually pitching to, and you can just cover a lot of water and get bites up shallow. It's a good month.
Okay. Let's roll on to Dale Hollow, which is, again, to me, one of the more famous Highland reservoirs. Let me see if I can get her pulled up here. Nope. Okay. So this is Dale Hollow Lake. And right on the Tennessee-Kentucky border, where the world record smallmouth came from, it is the stereotypical Highland Reservoir. So, right here is Star Point Marina. That's where all the BFLs, it's where most of the larger tournaments come out of. Where in this area up here, if you like, first off, do you like this area, or are you trying to run up a river? Where are you trying to go, Rob?
I mean, honestly, like I told y'all I usually like fishing down on the lower end of the water or lower end of lakes because typically for me, I've seen the biggest bass live down there.
Yep.
And that's where I feel like the water is the cleanest. With like last month we were talking about scoping. This month I really like, might only be 5'7", 5'8" in cowboy boots, but I like sight fishing, even though I'm not vertically gifted and it's harder for me to see them, but I really enjoy it. And when I'm just, going out in April and trying to have fun, I like to try to find fish on the bed so I can, because it's just a challenge for me, is like getting those fish, each one is different. And I really like just trying to figure out, what ticks them off or what sets them off to end up biting my lure on the bed. So that's where I like to start, is doing that number. And
all right, let's get into how to make them bite here in just a second. Right here, we're on the lower end of Dale Hollow. This is Mitchell Creek. This is Horse Creek. A couple more down here on the lower end. So what do you see right here that stands out to you as a spawning pocket?
So typically, I like to, first off, when I just start on a lake, I go into one of the bigger creek arms, or like just a bigger creek. So I mean, not like that big of a creek, you know what I mean, Mitchell, but like just one of these creeks, you know what I mean? Because that's a fairly decent sized creek, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a huge, renowned Mitchell Creek, like big, huge creek with a marina in it. But those, typically, I start in those just to try to figure out where the bass are, you know what I mean? So last month, I talked about how I like to start out and work myself in. I should run all the way to the back and then work my way out. And I usually fish if if I haven't been to Dale Hollow in a while and I want to figure out where they're at, I'll run all the way to the back of this creek, fish around, pitch my wacky rig or throw a swim bait or, try to generate some bites and just be constantly scanning down the bank to try to find, a fish spawning or see if there's any beds that have been made and they're not on them or if a buck's on the bed or whatnot. And so I start in the back because I don't know. I feel like sometimes like if these fish are out on the main lake, chasing bait or on points and they're going to spawn in a creek, they'll just swim all the way to the back and kind of like run into the wall. And then that's where they spawn. Because like sometimes you'll look in all these pockets going all the way to the back and you'll see one, maybe two bedfish. And then when you get to the back, there's like 20 of them. You know what I mean? So you want to go and try to see that first. You know what I mean? And also it's raining right now. We've got some storms going on at the house too. So it could vary if there's a lot of run in, like murkying up the water in the back. But that's just typically what I like to do.
What kind of cover are you looking for? Are you looking for more pea gravelly stuff? Are you looking for, bigger chunk rocks that you can flip cracks on? Or what are you actually visually looking for to say, okay, what's a high percentage area that a bed fish is going to be there?
So usually for largemouth, to me, it seems like they're more, around some sort of like, where there's wood, kind of like wood and like sandier bottom, if that makes sense. Like still kind of hard bottom, but like not just jagged rock everywhere. They definitely do spawn in that, but I like, that more like wood, maybe some like grass vegetation, like milfoil looking stuff with like sand around. That's usually a pretty good bet. But Highland Reservoirs, there's not a ton of that. Dale Hollow, it's got some grass, but that's typically a good. It'll make the water cleaner if you find some sort of vegetation in the back like that. But typically that's the kind of scenario I like to see. Like, because usually if they're spawning on those like sandy beds, it'll be like a good spot you can visually see them. Like the bed will be very bright and it'll have like dark. They'll be pushed the dark stuff out, so it'll be a very bright area of where they're sitting on. You know what I mean?
So primarily you're throughout the month of April, you're looking for sight fish. And I feel like glasses are a really, really important part of that. What kind of glasses do you use? Do you have a favorite lens color?
Yeah, I use the Waterland laydown. I prefer glass. That's the go-to. The glass lenses are always the best for me. I know they're more expensive, but they do cut the water a little bit better and they protect your eyes from, if you're fishing for one on a bed and half a foot of water and you think it bites and you jerk and that Texas rig's flying back at your face, that glass will protect your eye where plastic will, knock a hole with your tungsten weight in plastic. Glass it'll just crack the lens and yeah, you'll probably have to get a warranty claim on them, but you don't have a punctured eye, Yeah,
I'm a big glass lens guy as well. What color do you like?
I'm a green lens. Yeah.
So
for like brighter days, I'm a green guy, but then when it's overcast, they've got these, like this yellow based lens and it brightens up everything. And I really like those too when it's really overcast.
That's exactly what I use. I use a green mirror % of the time. And then if it's ever overcast, I go to more of a yellow, brighter type deal. To me, you can see a lot better. So what's your process here? You already mentioned a wacky rig or a swim bait, something like that. Are you just trolling motor on high and you're looking at, this pocket here? We're looking at, back here around this marina behind all the docks there and just, trolling motor on high, running the entire pockets or what's your process?
Yeah. So typically if there is a marina in the back like that on Highland Reservoirs, marinas hold a lot of bass underneath like the cables and suspended underneath them. But when they spawn, typically the marina areas of the Highland Reservoir lakes have the most spawning bass around them. And they'll even spawn on if there's motors left in the water or cross members on the these are, real clear, but marinas are a great place to start to go find spawning bass on Highland Reservoirs. if you don't fish a lot of them, you wouldn't know that, but that's a great place to start to look. You know what I mean?
So right here's Horse Creek Marina, and it's a giant marina. There's tons of houseboats and all kinds of stuff here. I just saw randomly, I just saw where they put 122 foot. It's the largest houseboat that's ever been built. 122 foot long, like 24 feet wide or something crazy houseboat on Del Hollow this week.
Holy cow.
Yeah,
So,
bigger
Del Hollow is it's a really cool lake to fish for fish on bed, because they can be, you know, down the bank, but they can also spawn in these marinas. Like, they don't even have to move up shot. Like, that's it. They do it kind of on Norris too, and like a couple other that have a lot of marinas. Like, so, you know, those people that have bought slips, but, you know, they don't really take care of them that much. This is some juice. They've got those like blue float lifts. You know what I'm talking about? Like and like those metal floated lifts. They spawn on those too. Like, I've caught fish that were like that was their bed. They had a bed in the middle of one of those lifts, and it was probably a foot under the surface. You know what I'm saying? And that's
over
what they
40 or
use
50 feet of water or whatever it is.
Yeah, but exactly.
I've never seen them do that. I fish a lot of marinas, but I've never, you know, visibly saw one spawning like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but like, I've caught a few at Del Hollow doing that, Norris Lake, and like a Lake Norman, you know, like I've definitely, like, that's a good lake to do it at as well. In a college tournament, we caught one that was like a 6-pounder at Lake Norman that was spawning on one of those. And, you know, the buck would be sitting right up there on the little spot it made on the sunk float that the boat obviously wasn't there, parked on it. Once we got that buck, you know, mad enough, that female came up there and sat up there with him. She eventually bit.
That's really cool. And there's quite a few marinas on all of these lakes, you know, because they're so pretty, because they're so clear. They're a mecca for recreational boaters. So there's always going to be a ton of marinas, you know, any Highland Reservoir that you go to. So we're looking in the backs. We're looking around these marinas. We know where to go look. Now, how do we look? Are you trolling motor on 10 and you've got a wacky rig in your hand, or what? Let's talk about some baits that you're going to use to search for them first. Because a lot of times, you know, you've got to make one move to see them. At least I do. I'm no John Cox by any means.
Yeah. So typically what I do when baits I use to search for them is, number one is a wacky rig. I mean, that is the bread and butter of search bait during the spawn, because, you know, these fish aren't going to move a lot off of their area where they're spawning to come chase down a bait. So you're either going to have to throw something that's moving slow, like a swim bait. That's my number two, is I like throwing like a mag draft or like just a line through swim bait searching. You know what I mean? But number one, first and foremost, is a wacky rig, either Senko or trick worm.
Okay. What color Senko or trick worm do you use?
I'm a big, just green pumpkin baby bass Senko man, or like green pumpkin blue flake. Those are like the three for Highland Reservoirs I use. And then trick worm, I'm a watermelon candy man, or bubble gum.
Is there any reason that you go between one or the other? Or are you going to have both of them on your deck all the time?
It seems to me like I use a watermelon candy on that trick worm when the water is ultra calm, like there's no wind movement at all. It's just a little bit, you know, just not as bold. But if there's a little bit of breeze in the water, like you can't, like there's a breeze that's cutting the water, like seeing through it, you know, a little bit more, I throw that bubble gum, and you can really see them come up there and check that out too. Like, you can see your bubble gum trick worm move. You know what I mean? It's kind of like throwing them in Thigh Lake, like a worm. You know what I mean? But I just prefer a wacky rig bubble gum. That's my go-to.
What's your setup? What's your wacky rig setup?
Just a 7-foot medium with a 10-pound braid to 8-pound leader.
Pretty standard spinning rod setup for about 80% of what you can do.
Yep. Ryugi, talisman, hook, and they make a weedless version and a non-weedless version, just depending on kind of what I'm fishing. I usually probably have two of them rigged up. One where I can just flip, you know, around rock and stuff, and one where I can skip up under trees and stuff. So weedless.
Okay. All right. What is bait number 2? You said a mag draft?
Yeah, a mag draft style swim bait like that. And you have to reel slow, and they'll either swim out after it and chase it, or just smoke it. You know what I mean?
Is that like the 6-inch? What colors do you like in a mag draft? Because that was one of your baits in March as well.
Yeah. So in a mag draft, I like really the albino or then the whiteback shad, and then
Those are
the IU when it's real sunny.
Okay.
It's like more slick.
So are those your only 2 search baits just when you're looking, or do you have another one, or if we're if we're taking 5 or 6 rods, what all do we need to have on deck for sure?
So then Highland Reservoirs, it's different because you can also be bed fishing and fishing for spawning smallmouth, right? So I'll have rods rigged up for that too, because that's really fun. And that typically doesn't happen, in the backs of these creeks like we were talking about for largemouth. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's really fun. I really love doing that. For that, I usually just pretty simple as well. Like I'll throw a 4-inch wacky worm, just the same Yamamoto, 4-inch Yamamoto, and a Ned rig is really what I like to throw mainly. 80% of the time searching around with a Ned rig. And then I mix it up between a split shot and a small Texas rig also for the smallmouth.
Okay. So
that's like a 4-inch robo style worm, either on an 1/8 ounce Texas rig or like a 3/16 ounce split shot.
All still on a spinning rod?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that you think like that Texas rig and that split shot, you can kind of just like, it's real slow and you drag it. But what I do with that is I like throw it and either shake it and reel back to the boat, or like shake it and reel real slow back to the boat, if that makes sense.
Oh, so you're not dragging it along the bottom. You're actually fishing it up off the bottom just a little bit.
No, I'm not fishing it off the bottom. I'm keeping it on the bottom, but just reeling it back.
Gotcha.
Really slow, like counting the rocks.
So what are you looking for?
Kinda slow.
Let's go back to our map just a second. What are you looking for on spawning smallmouth?
Spawning smallmouth, they're a little bit different. They can spawn anywhere from points to like transition areas. You would think as a transition area, but it's got a lot to do with the bottom composition for them.
So you actually need to be looking at Google Earth more than your traditional maps like this.
For sure.
Okay.
Because they'll spawn on the main lake.
So any of these points like this right here that we're looking at?
Yeah, exactly. And then like, these areas that are kind of a little bit off the main river channel, it's really hard for me to just like kind of pick out an area on a lake map. You know what I mean? It's kind of like one of those visual things you have to.
So what are you looking
doing it?
And when I think about spawning small,
yeah, exactly. Pea gravel is the number one place that a smallmouth will spawn on a Highland reservoir. Most definitely, like top to bottom. And then number 2 is like that red clay. They like kind of around there too. You know what I mean? Like, especially in East Tennessee where I live, like on Fort Loudon, Tellico is like, if there's not a ton of pea gravel banks, but they'll also spawn on those like gravelly clay banks too. Like that's, if it's got like a clay looking washout, and I'm like, all right, that's probably where some are hanging out. If it's not just straight pea gravel, but pea gravel is the number 1 on the menu for a smallmouth to spawn at.
And they are the most aggressive bed fish in the whole entire world. Like I'd never fished for spawning smallmouth. I drug around a Carolina rig and stuff and caught them around home, but went to Champlain last year or a couple of years ago in a Toyota, and those fish were spawning up there. And they were the dumbest things I'd ever seen. Like they had boaters that would catch them and weigh them and be like, oh, this one's not going to help me, and turn him back loose, pull forward 5 feet, and let the co-angler catch him. And the fish bites again immediately. Like they're so dumb.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, that's how they are like where we live too. It's harder for us to, see them with our eyes. That's the harder part with bed fishing for smallmouth is, we're talking about bed fishing for smallmouth, but you're really not visually fishing for them. It's kind of like you're just making fan cast on these banks, and like wherever you get a bite at, you got to think, okay, that's a bed. So you throw up there and you catch a 12-inch smallmouth, you need to throw back right up exactly where you just caught that one, because there's probably another bigger one there. And you'll probably catch one on the next cast. So that's how aggressive they are when a bait gets around their bed.
And to me, that kind of holds the same true for largemouth as well. You know, if you catch a little one, you need to be throwing back in there with a wacky rig or, you know, caught them on a mag draft or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we actually go ahead.
I was going to say another bait that's kind of slipped on for like Highland Reservoir, like spawn type, when it's a little bit warmer, is a frog. Those big females will come up and look at it, even if they don't bite it. And I've caught some, especially at like Cumberland and places like that. Like you can throw that around up under or just like down, cause you can get it farther away. That's the big thing with the Highland Reservoir spawners, but for largemouth, it's like you can't get too close to them or they're going to be real skittish because the water's so clear. So that's a good way to see one. You know what I mean? It'll rise up on it and check it out.
And then you can hold back and flip to it or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and another good search bait is a glide bait. I mean, that's a great search tool on a Highland Reservoir to see what bass are living in that pocket. You know what I mean? Like you could see some males on the bed up there, but you're like, I wonder where the females are. And you just, you know, parallel that bank or whatever, and you'll see some huge fish come up and just at least look at your bait. You might not catch any, but you'll have a good feel of what's around.
I feel like a glide bait's one of those things that's really misunderstood. And they're becoming a lot more popular. Like at the Classic Expo, those glide bait guys that were having, you know, bait drops there were super popular. There were people standing in line to get them. But just like you mentioned, a Highland Reservoir and a glide bait go together, as Forrest said, like peas and carrots. Just because the water's so clear, there's a lot of times here, there's some pretty good sized fish there. Do you have a favorite glide?
Yeah, I've got a bunch. I've got into my buddy, my roommate in college, he got into the glide game. So he got me into it, and I've got all kinds of different ones now. But I mean, I used to just throw around that like Storm Arashi, the one Brandon Polnick was throwing. That was a good cheap one. That one in the river to sea. That's what I used to like originally. The S-Waver. Those were the two. But now I've gotten he's got me bougie, and I've bought these freaking $100 to $200 glide baits, and I've got kind of a low start of an addiction. But dude, I like them all, man. I've got Chad, KGBs, freaking Clutch Bosses, and the Baby Boss, and the Eco Darter, and the Darter, and MM26. I don't know. Those are the three I really usually have tied on. And the Mike Buka. That's another one I really like, is the Mike Buka Bullshad, Trick Shad. Yeah, the Bullshad. And the ABS, the new ABS one. That one's a cheaper version to get to just throw around that ABS they just came out with for the Buka brand. And I like the Trick Shad. It's a really good bait too. But either like sometimes this time of year, I kind of like that, you know, more trout, like especially on a Highland Reservoir, like the Depths 250, like that.
Oh, wow. Like we're going tennis shoe size.
Yeah. Like if I'm trying to see what's in the pocket, you know what I mean? Like I know going into it, it would be sick to catch this fish, but I'm probably not going to catch one right now. I'm just trying to see what's around. You know what I mean? And that's why I throw that big Depths 250 like that.
That's like the OG of all glide baits.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, like I don't go out and try to catch monster bags on glide baits. I kind of just have them to either catch one or two that day, like whenever I want to throw it, or to see what's around, to get some follows. You know what I'm saying? And get confidence in an area with bass in it. You know?
I know exactly what and I feel like that's where, for a tournament fisherman, that's where a glide bait truly, truly shines, is in practice, maybe not in the tournament, but is getting those fish to come out and look. You can either see them on your forward facing sonar, or you can see them with your eyeballs just following that bait, because you'll have 50 followers to one that eats. And occasionally you'll luck up on that one day that conditions are absolutely perfect, and you'll catch 10 of them on it or 7 of them on it or something. But those days are few and far between.
For sure. But it is always a great bait to have tied on during this time of year, like during the spawn, because it also, you can pitch one of those around a bed, like spawning fish, and they will get really, really, really mad. So that's another thing I always keep on my deck for that, just agitating process of bed fish. It's a glide bait too.
Okay. I feel like bed fishing is almost misunderstood to a degree, as far as most people are just flipping in and they don't understand the different intricacies of catching bedfish. And it's something I'd never really studied or never had a chance to do a ton until the last few years. And I've taught myself a ton about it. Like, you just got to go do it. Farm ponds or whatever, like, bedfish is a bedfish all over the country. And
it is.
You just got to go catch them. So talk a little bit about your process. Say we see one rise on a glide or a mag draft, or we catch a little male and we spin back around where we just caught the male and now there's a female, on this bed. Let's talk about visually catching bass and your process.
Yeah. So the number one bait the two baits I want to catch them if I can off a bed are, number one, a Texas rig, because it's got some strong hook and you can crack them. And it's like when they bite it and you set the hook in them, 9 out of 10 times it's not coming off, and, or number two, a wacky rig. And it's the same type. Like, if you set the hook on one and they bite it, most of the time you're not going to lose that fish. So those are what I usually want to catch them on, and I try to, but there is also a lot of other baits that, you can flip up there to try to get them agitated if it doesn't take, the first. But what I'm usually looking for, and I know that if I see 2 bass up there spawning, you know what I mean? And I flip my bait up there and they don't just run off and go hide, that fish is going to get caught. I mean, you have a 95% chance of catching that fish. Like, if they don't swim off and they're stayed tight to that bed, if your bait up there, that means they're mad that your bait's around and they're probably going to bite it. At least pick it up to take it off of it. And that's like when you get that little tingling feeling that you're like, okay, yeah, this is about to happen. But, I wish it would happen like that, but that only happens about 5 or 10% of the time you see one. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Usually it's a lot more longer of a process. You put the poles down, the one fish or both fish swim off, and then a little bit later, after you're just sitting there waiting and looking, they come back. And you flip in there and they kind of do like a little lap. And that's when that's where great bed fishermen are different than just mediocre bed fishermen, is how to read that fish and knowing where to put your bait and how to react. Like, I'm still working on it. Like, I'm nowhere near some of these guys on the Elite Series. They're just truly unbelievable at it. And I'm learning from them. Like, I've been talking to Jacob Poroznik about he's pretty sneaky, but I'm trying to get in his mind about bed fishing because he's truly insane at it. But that's just, where were we? I've kind of got sidetracked.
No, you're
thinking
good.
about catching fish off bed. Because it's just so cool to me.
It is.
You know what I mean?
It's super cool. It's hand-to-hand combat, and they can see you. Mm-hmm. And to me, you're not trying to trick them into biting a lure because they think it's food. Like, this is, I'm smarter than you, even though your brain's the size of a pea, and I'm going to make you bite. And this is the only time of the year that you can do that.
Yes, and that's why I like it. Just makes me smile because it's so rewarding when you get one to bite. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you can flip up there and they'll just go down on it and bite it as soon as they see it. But most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, it's not like that. But when you see a fish, what makes it, like, obviously if we're in a tournament, you're not stopping on every 1.5 pound or 2 pound fish that you see. Mm-hmm. What does that fish have to do for you to be like, okay, I'm going to stop and think I've got a pretty good shot at catching you? And even though some of them are locked on, there's been a couple that I pulled up on that I'm like, oh yeah, your ass is caught. And then 45 minutes later, I'm still hitting it in the head with a 1 ounce weight trying to make it mad enough to bite. And it doesn't. So occasionally that doesn't happen. But what are you looking, what's your highest percentage when you look in and you see one? What makes it a high percentage fish that you're going to spend some time on other than size? Yeah. So basically, if it's, like I said, if they swim off, if their lap is really tight to the bait or to the bed, like they don't swim off and it takes them 3 minutes to come back. If they just swim off a little ways and just kind of float there for a second and then swim right back and you're still there, like you hadn't moved, they're really wanting to be there, like, and it's just in their animal instincts that they're not going to leave. Like they're on high alert, and that's what. Whenever I see a bass acting that way, that's when I'm like, okay, I think I can catch this one. You know what I mean?
When you get that tingly feeling down in your plums.
Yeah, exactly. There always is those real stubborn ones that do that, and they just will never bite. And I truly think it's because they probably got caught that day.
Very possibly.
Or something.
So let's talk about your process, because to me, every great bed fisherman has either I start with this and then I go to this, or
yeah. So
let's talk about your process.
On a Highland Reservoir, if you're fishing in a tournament for fish on bed, the number one way to really catch them well, in my opinion, is to have them marked before you go to them. You know what I mean? There is a process for seeing one randomly and putting your poles down and letting it set back up and then pitching at it and agitating it. But if you're fishing a tournament on a Highland Reservoir, you need to have these fish marked so you can make a bomb cast with typically what I use is a wacky worm. Just have something marked on the bank. Like I'll even, have a lineup of what, and put it on my waypoint notes, like this stick or aim at this tree when you throw, because you want to be the boat as far as possible away from them, and then make you, if they don't, usually, most of the time when you do that, you'll catch them on the first cast. If you throw a wacky worm up there, you'll just see it start swimming off. And that's why it's so beneficial to have them marked and have those lineups, because that's how, when I've had big days on Highland Reservoirs bed fishing, that's how you do it. It's like you found the bed and then you don't see them eat it. You know what I mean? You just make a cast up there and fish for fish for them off.
Yeah. Once they see you, your chances of catching
really
them
hard.
Goes down, or at least it taking a lot longer goes down tremendously.
So that's my number one thing on a Highland Reservoir is what I like to do is that process. Even if I see one in a pocket when I'm going from 1 to 1, like I usually trolling motor and home 10 and I see a new one, I'm like, okay, mark that. And I just keep going. And then I go on the other one I have marked, try to fish for it off of it and hopefully catch that and then go back and make a long cast on that other one I seen. You know what I mean? That's the biggest thing for me is make those long casts and try to fish for it without visually looking at it. And then from there, if it's a big one, like it didn't eat, but it's still there, you go up there and look and it's still there. That's when you really have to get in the zone of making it bite. And that's when it's hand-to-hand combat.
You were talking about making notes in your waypoints as far as what this fish is or whatever. The best thing I've found is I will take a picture with my phone to where I can see the bed and see the bank zoomed out a little bit. And then on my waypoint, I'll actually, pick 1704. And then the next one's 1705. So when I get back to it, I'll actually pull that picture back up. Okay, he's on the right side of that stump, or he's on the left side of that bush, or whatever.
Yeah.
But that way you've actually got a visual representation of, okay. And it's up there when I know, when you can see the bed, you can see the fish, and I know that that's where that thing's going to be the next day. But no, taking a picture to me works amazing. And you can actually hold your sunglasses in front of the lens to make it polarized and you can see them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea. But that's the biggest key for me right there is fishing for them off, like fishing your boat off of them, like fishing for them first. Is the number one thing you got to do. Because most of the time, you would be surprised. You have that fish marked and you make a long cast up there to it and it doesn't feel your presence. They might, good odds they're going to bite because they're just in their zone. You know what I mean?
And they're not on alert. They're not looking at you. They're not feeling the boat. They're not doing anything like that.
Exactly.
Well, we've got a stubborn 5-pounder and we can see it and,
She's not leaving.
So now what are we doing?
So that's when it's really, you got to take in whether it's on the bed with a male or if it's just by itself or not. Okay. See, usually if it's by itself like that, you can, do what you were talking about earlier, hitting it in the tail and in the head and making it kind of shock bite, like whether you flip it up there and hop it into them and then they turn around and bite it like that. That's usually probably the prime time method of catching that one by itself. But if there's a male up there with it, is what you kind of want to do. And from what I've seen is you want to make that male as mad as possible, either hitting him on the tail or flipping up there and have him biting it. And I know some people they have dummy baits with no hooks to flip up there at the male to make him mad and have him carry off baits after baits after baits. And that'll eventually make that female mad enough to come up there and like want to either, like, I've seen it to where that I've had a bite, the male bite it 10 times in a row, and the female's just sitting there watching. And then for some reason, whatever, on the 11th time he tries to bite it, she just rushes up there and swallows it. You know what I mean? And then you got her. But that's the big thing. People, they're like, oh, I'm going to catch this male and get him out of the way. Most of the time, I don't know if you really want to do that. You know what I mean? Because I feel like I've seen where it makes the female just kind of not really want to be there with her male not there.
So you'll actually take a hitchhiker or something and with another Texas rig, flip in there and just keep on getting that male to carry it off. Even if he's 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds, whatever, if you've got a big female there, you want him to stay there as long as you can.
Yeah. Like you've seen on Bass Live, like Drew Cook and Drew Benton, and they're the two of the best too. And You've seen them in the tournaments. Like they'll catch a male on accident because they're probably fishing off of the bed where they can't really see which one's biting. And they'll catch it and it'll be the male. And they're like, I don't know whether I should put this in a live wire or just throw it back. And most of the time is they throw it back in there to have him swim back up there so the female will stick around. And it's on those big ones, it seems like you need that male in there too, just to get it mad so the female will get mad. And I mean, each one is different. Like it's like people, like the fish are different and you're going to have to catch them a different way or get them mad a different way. Like I know on Highland Reservoirs, like I was talking about earlier, like getting them real pissed off on a glide bait is huge, and even a jerk bait. Like I've gotten them real mad on a jerk bait. Like obviously you don't want to try to have to catch one on a jerk bait because, it could be on the outside of the mouth, but just having that pull through the bed and getting them like all flurried that a little shad's going through that's a really big thing like that I like to do, just like pulling those baits they haven't really seen much on their bed through there and to get them flustered and then get your big hook up there and hook them.
And a jerk bait is not a bad bait to throw, in my opinion, when you're way away from them before you can see them. So the rule is if you are visually looking at a bass, he cannot be hooked outside the mouth. Exactly. If you are a cast away, and even though a bed's up there, if you're not looking at him, if you're not visually looking at that fish and he's got a megabass pinned to his face on the outside, you can still keep him because you wasn't looking at him.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great bait too. I would say number one cast when you're way off of them, it'd be with a wacky worm. That would just be me. But I would, throw a jerk bait up there a time or two too. Like kind of like you're fishing for a school is like kind of having a process like that.
What Texas rig bait do you use?
I'm usually just kind of like I like flipping just anything. I'm a white just so I can see it. You know what I mean? A lot of guys are like, no, I've always flipped green pumpkin. I just like to see them eat it. You know what I mean? So I know when to jerk.
It's cool.
Yeah. And I can see them pick it up and I know when to jerk. But I'm usually just a white, like brush hog, like a white brush hog, or I haven't really flipped a lizard on a bed in a while, but that would be a pretty good one too. I feel like any sort of bait like that the hook can penetrate super well when they barely suck it in. Like you don't want to flip a big, huge, chunky beaver that you would flip in a mat where your hook doesn't poke out. You know what I mean? Like those type of baits you don't want to be flipping on a bed. You want something that's like more of a worm style body so your hook can go through really fast. Like you want your hook to be exposed. So when it barely grabs it, it's pinned.
Are you a straight shank or EWG guy when you're flipping like this?
I like a straight shank if I'm dealing with huge largemouth, but EWG is fine too, really. But I'm usually typically a straight shank, like just so I can hammer it home. If I'm like, I was at Fort bed fishing last week, and that's when I always have a straight shank because there's big, huge 7-8 pounders laying up on the bed. But it just really depends. I mean, I'll definitely flip a EWG too.
What size weight are you using?
I'm usually a 3/8.
3/8
on a Texas rig. 3/8, 5/16, somewhere out there. But it kind of just depends on the water clarity and just how they're acting. But I like to have that bigger, heavier weight,
For sure. Yeah, I flip a 3/4 occasionally. Like if you can't get them to bite,
Yeah.
And I'll put a 3/4 and just, I mean, it ain't real nice to them, but you just beat the shit out of them.
Yeah.
Hit them in the tail,
Sometimes
hit them in the
you
back of
got
the
to.
head, and eventually
Yep.
you'll either run them off or they'll eat.
Yeah.
One of the two.
Yeah. They'll get mad enough to bite. But you, like I said earlier, you don't want a big, huge, thick beaver on there that your hook can't get through when they barely bite like that. You know what I mean? That's why I like that. Like the best beaver for that situation, if you like flipping a beaver, is that big bite baits one that Drew Benton and Drew Cook throw. That, what's it called? Fighting frog. Because it's really thin.
Yep.
The fighting frog. It's a really thin beaver. So your hook can penetrate really fast. And that's the big key to me. Like I know some of the guys, like they'll alter, if they have their favorite bait, they'll alter it where they'll just take some scissors and cut where the hook's sticking out and make it real thin. So as soon as they grab it.
That just on a 7.3 medium heavy or 7.3 heavy, what do you, 20-pound line?
Yeah. Yeah. Or, yeah, depending on if it's real clear, I'll just go 15, you know, and the type of cover, it's just depending. Another one I really like flipping on the bed is a Tokyo rig. That's like the only time I ever do use a Tokyo rig is for bed fishing.
I've not thought about that, but it makes sense.
Yep. Yep. Like I'll put like a freaking Kitech, like a 4.3 Kitech on a open exposed, you know, that flipping exposed Tokyo rig they make. Just rig it on there, thread it on with a Tokyo rig and just flip it through and pull it through the bed and and you can hit them with that swim bait. You know, they like that swim bait on a bed for some reason, some places.
I agree.
On that Tokyo rig.
I agree. Well, where's one place that most people make mistakes when they're bed fishing?
I would say they usually get too close to them. You know what I'm saying? They make the fish just feel like they just get on top of them. I mean, some lakes up north, you can literally spot lock your boat over top of them, and it doesn't matter. But around here, you want to be as far away as possible. You know what I mean? And usually in Highland Reservoirs, you can see deep in the water. So for that, you want to be farther away than normal. You know what I mean? Instead of fishing like a Fort Loudon where the waters are a little murkier, you can be a little bit closer just because that's just kind of how they act. But on Highland Reservoir, you want to be as far away as possible. And that's where I see most people mess up. Like, I hadn't caught this. I've been sitting on it for 2 hours. Well, yeah, you're 10 foot. Your trolling motor's 10 foot from the bed.
Right.
Like, yeah, they're not going to bite. Where you probably, if you'd have had that fish marked or knew where. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
I'm getting a phone call. Sorry. Freaking McKee is calling me.
Oh, dadgummit, McKee.
But what was I talking about?
Having them marked.
Yeah. You can catch them. Like usually when you're farther away like that, that's the biggest key for me. Is like, that's rule number one. Is just keeping a good distance away. And not
there you have it.
Skittish.
We have got a master class on bed fishing on Highland Reservoirs. That's what you need to be doing in the month of April. We'll try to have Rob on again in May, and then probably give him a few months off because nobody's really fishing Highland Reservoirs unless it's at night in June, July, August.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'll be fishing on the TVA.
Yeah, exactly. That or going up north and catching great big smallmouth. Exactly. So, well,
yeah, this is a great time of year to go fish on Highland Reservoirs, whether it be for smallmouth or largemouth. You know,
it is. It is like a sore pecker. You can't beat it.
Mm-hmm. And like we were talking about last, you can still run up the rivers and catch bass like on a spinnerbait and stuff too, like around bushes and flip bushes. But I just like bed fishing because you don't get to do it all year here like you do in Florida or something.
It's a cool thing. I completely agree. Well, y'all hit that subscribe button. I feel like we've taught y'all how to catch bass on a Highland Reservoir in April, and you can take it to the bank.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank. Hold the line. Hey, you know we on the way. All the time. Yeah.